How's everybody doing? Well, I have another one for you. It's Pluto in the third house. Now, as the progression of Pluto continues to move from the ascendant, the second house, and the third house, there's a completely different shift. You see, when we're talking about the first house, we're talking about the personality, the ego, the physical body of the person, the internal environment, but also the immediate environment. Even though it's external, for all intents and purposes, right? The field of influence between the physical body and the environment of the person, which defines the first house, is very small. Very small. And within that exists the second house of internal psychology and sense of self and what shapes it from the immediate environment, right? When we reach the third house, this environment that it's immediate and close on the ascendant or the first house becomes completely externalized. Completely externalized. Now we have the street, the block, around the corner, neighborhood, neighbors, the store, the laundromat, the ice cream parlor, the liquor store. The sense of community. The sense of community. It is the physical environment outside of the person's internal environment, which begins on the first house and extends towards the second. Not that far from the ascendant, but then we see a big shift when we're dealing with the third house, the natural house of Gemini. So it rules the external environment. But like the Lover's card in tarot, the third house belonging to Gemini involves so many things. In fact, it involves so many things that I might have to do a Pluto in the third house part 2. Yeah, it's that extensive, and it's already 4 minutes and I barely got started. It's a lot. Then you have, aside from the physical environment and everything that's in it that creates a community, a hospital, a school, a nursing home, a convalescence, a hospital, the parlor, the liquor store, the candy store, the lottery machine, the smoke shop, everything that constitutes a community, the church, right? All that is ruled by the third house. But also going back to the ascendant, which, when it comes to aspects, is sextiles Gemini. You have what we call the 5 senses. Sense of sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. No. I think I'm missing one or just messed up one. This is the five senses, right? You know what I mean? I might have skipped one or erroneously named one that isn't. But you know that I'm aware of this error if it's there. Five senses. And these are the five senses of the ego. If there's no five senses, there is no ego. Because the five senses honor and only cater to the physical environment, the physical manifestation of matter. We see matter, we hear matter, we smell matter, we taste matter, we touch matter. So it's all ego. And the upper ego and the lower ego, which defines the solar plexus. So one can say that the third house, more so than the fifth house, which is the definition of the solar sun in Leo, which is the field that's created, which we call the fifth house, is not actually the manifestation out of nowhere, boom, here I am. Like, you know, all kinds of pressurized matter. Eventually, any pressurized matter in the cosmos reaches a critical mass. And when that critical mass is pushed to the limit, you have the birth of a star. Well, that pressurized energy before it becomes a star is also defined by the third house. The ignition, the ignite, the spark, which later becomes the sun in the fifth house of Leo, is defined and governed by cause and effect, yin and yang, negative, positive polarity. The friction between these two opposing forces is what, when brought together, now they oppose naturally, but if you force them together with enough pressure, it breaks the rules and creates a new paradigm. So true transformation begins in the third house, because the inner transformation that occur within with Pluto in the first house is not so much revelatory or indicative that the ego is getting an epiphany or an enlightenment. He just might be just going through crisis, not being aware that along the line, these crises are helping define the future man he will be. But we're too young in the first house to realize this. But by the third house, you're reaching teen years. The ego is formed. Now there's identity that is separate from another, and variety, which also falls under the third house of Gemini. It's here where the creator is Brahma, Vishnu, Kali, Allah, Yahweh, and Ra. Here is where we see differentiations. And just like it exists among the gods, it exists among men too. The third house also rules extended family members. aunt, uncle. Second, the first cousins is the first house. Second cousins and third cousins is the third house. It also rules brothers and sisters, siblings, and twins. But the third house rules so much more than that. And then we have inner feelings and emotions that normally you would see in the fourth house in Cancer. But Cancer is the end result. The genesis of what then later becomes Cancer lies in the third house of Gemini. And these are feelings of envy and jealousy. Both are distinctly different from each other. The one that's really dangerous is envy. And these are energies that we emit towards each other, but they are energy currents. We may define them what we do, but it doesn't mean that they are what we define them as we experience what they can do versus any reference point outside of that we can say, no, it doesn't mean this and it doesn't feel this. There's no way of knowing. But what scientists have done when they measure envy and jealousy is that it is no different an atom or a cation than yin and yang, negative and positive polarities, and so on and so forth. These are still negative and opposing energies that have like a whiplash effect, and is generated from deep emotional states that are to this day mysterious and deeply disturbing, yet it is part of the human psyche. So the third house also rules the shadow aspect of self. This is the third house. So, where do we begin? Well, one more faction of the third house is that it rules communication. How you speak to yourself, how you speak to people, and the impact that it can cause. Either a person, a family, a community, or a generation. Words kill here. Like it says in the Bible, life and death is determined by the power of the tongue. Who can tame such a beast? So understand that the lovers and Gemini and the third house are deeply, deeply complex signs, planets, and houses. Mercury, is still very poorly understood in mythology. And out of all the planets that I have done videos for you guys, the one that I have never done video on was Mercury. It's still very deeply complex, but I think I'm getting close to decoding Mercury. Understand that slander and character assassination also belongs to the third house of Gemini. Oh God, what else? It also rules power lines, communication lines, street lamps and street lights, and also the Earth's grid falls here as well. Sign language, technical communication, multiple languages also falls here in the third house. I told you it covers a lot of things here. It does. And the electromagnetic frequencies And alpha waves also fall in the third house, governing our towers that give us the emissions for Wi-Fi. That falls under the third house. Mercury, radio waves, micro changes in air density, for those of you who take physics. So it also rules the mind, the collective mind. It is where it exists in the 11th and the 12th, but in high concepts. When it comes to the lower ego, it is the third house that governs the masses, along with the 7th house, the open public. So it also rules exposure. It also rules what we call secondary exposure, which is the elements and the destructive force of nature. That also falls in the third house, the effector of the environment. Pluto in the third house will aggravate these things and push the envelope or push the limit to the highest extreme. And again, this is also true to Jeffrey Green. Pluto is defined by what it lacks. And therefore, we have found that in this house, Pluto lacks balance and coordination. And that what makes life so orderly, even amongst chaos, is that there is an underlying order through everything in the cosmos. And although this thin line of a common thread is something that maybe is imperceptible to humanity, it is the glue or the fabric that ties everything together, including chaos. With Pluto in the third house, there is a dismantling of that and having everything fall into such chaos that the higher consciousness that we know nothing about the cosmos or within the cosmos will have to come down to restore it. An example of this is Revelation, when the gods of the north and the south and the east and the west come down and they open the doors, and the gods tell them, do not hurt any tree or any plant, whatever, and let the waves come in and basically giving permission to destroy the planet and the solar system. In Revelation, there's a hierarchy that has to be brought down to do this, right? It is no much different than having that same concept and principle happen on Earth. And an example of the same analogy is by natural disasters, earthquakes, tsunamis, tornadoes, hurricanes, and tidal waves that could rise up out of nowhere, volcanic eruptions, and now the environment is completely threatened. With Pluto in the third house, at one point in your life, if you're at the wrong place at the wrong time, but then again, there's no such thing as the wrong time, you can experience a horrible experience of watching people die around you, such as in an earthquake or a tsunami or something like the towers of 9/11. That was Pluto in the third house, destroying a monument that defines America and killing over 5,000 people in the process. Complete annihilation. That's just an example and a taste of what it is to have Pluto in the third house. Guys, I hope this helps somebody.